The candle guttered in a draught that ought not to have been there. Wind had no business in the Kingsguard's austere cells, yet Jaime could feel it, the small, invisible intrusion that licked his cheek and set the flame to a nervous dance. He sat cross-legged upon the narrow bed with a scrap of parchment upon his thigh and the lion's signet, his father's signet, turned against his palm until the gold edge bit into flesh. He had thrown a boy from a tower for love. He had watched the blue of the sky swallow the boy's cry like a stone dropped into a deep well. Days later, the sound still came back to him at odd moments. A sharp intake, a ragged question, a fall. He had not been afraid then. He was afraid now. He sharpened the quill once more, unnecessary and delaying. The sand they used to keep the ink from pooling was gritty beneath his finger. Beneath the table, the marble floor held the day's cool breath. He thought of Cersei's hand when she slept, relaxed and weightless as silk across his chest, and of the way she had gripped him when she was awake. He thought of Joffrey's thin, contemptuous mouth, and Tommen's questioning eyes, and Myrcella's careful courtesy. He thought of Robert's careless hunts and careless laughter and the red cheeks of wine that never quite left him, and he thought of Father, whose silences could arm a man or unman him depending on their weight. He wrote without ceremony, because the ceremony had already died. Father, it began. There are truths I can no longer keep from you, lest they ruin us all in the end. He did not try to be eloquent. He wrote what must be written with the bluntness of a blade forced between ribs. I have loved Cersei since before I knew words for it. Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, they are mine. He wrote it twice because the first time the ink spread as if unwilling to hold so much treason. He wrote it twice because he had cast a boy from a height and there should be no quibbles left, no mistake at all. The second time the ink held. The letters lined up in neat, soldierly rows. He sealed the parchment with plain wax, and used to the Lannister red, and pressed the gold lion into it for boldness or cowardice. The two were cousins. When he rose, he felt older and lighter, and as if he were walking into a blade. He took the candle to the narrow window slit and held the seal up to the light. The wax cooled to a dull, honest sheen. He stuck the parchment in his boot because it had to touch something alive. He had to feel its presence. On his way out, he left the candle burning. Let some other brother of the Kingsguard notice and mark it in whatever ledger they kept for trifles. Let it be a blemish of the most ordinary sort to hide the bleeding wound beneath. He sent for a Lannister sworn man from the Red Keep's underbelly, a wiry fellow with a face like parchment and a mouth that said nothing and meant it. "Carry this to Casterly Rock," Jaime said softly. "Put it into Lord Tywin's hand and no other. If he is hunting or eating or asleep, wait until you see his eyes." The man bowed. Jaime caught his wrist. "If you are taken, swallow the letter. If you fail, I will find you." The man nodded as if it were a blessing and left as the dawn began to draw a gray line under the world. He found Cersei in the Queen's chamber in a gown that hung from her like poured sunlight. She dismissed her handmaids with a flick of her fingers and looked him over with a smile that had always been his and was now, suddenly, a dangerous thing. "My love," she said, "you look as if your belly is full of stones. Has the old boar bellowed you out of bed again?" "I sent a letter to Father," he said. He had meant to tell her gently. The words came like axes. "He will know. He will want to know. There is no hiding from him." Her face changed the way a still pond changes when a thrown rock finds it. A ripple, then a second ripple, then a deep disturbance widening outward. "You did what?" He had imagined her anger, her panic, even her tears. She was very pale. The gold of her hair brightened the paleness into something metallic. "You have put a blade in my belly," she said without raising her voice. "You have given our lives into his hands." "I have given our lives into the hands of the only man who can keep them," Jaime said. He wanted to take the words back because of the way she had spoken, but he could not. "I threw a boy, Cersei. It will not stay hidden. Eddard Stark is made of honor even when it hurts him. He will not look away. Stannis is made of steel, and the spider knows everything except when he doesn't, which is when he learns more. Father will see the whole board. He always does. He will separate us," she whispered. He will take you away from me." "He may try," Jaime admitted. Cersei stepped closer and set her hand on his cheek, gentle as a girl. "He can't take you from me," she said. And now she smiled again, sweet and false as a summer fruit with rot at the core. "Not while I breathe. We will be clever. We have always been clever. We have always been better than them." Jaime kissed her palm. He felt the pulse there, fast and steady. He wondered what would become of everything he had built of his life if Father bade him knock it down. He told himself he would not obey. He told himself many things that morning. At Casterly Rock, the sea beat itself against stone as it had done when the first Lannister bled a lion into the cliffs. Tywin received the letter in the cool, bright gallery that overlooked the waves. He was dictating accounts to a steward, numbers recited with the dispassion that turns gold into obedience, when the Lannister man was led in. His boots were dusty, though he had come by ship, which was a detail Tywin noted without comment. A good messenger will take the last mile on foot, for the look of it. The man bowed and offered the letter. "From your son, my lord," he said with a gravel voice. "He told me to wait until I saw your eyes." "You see them," Tywin said. He broke the seal with a clean thumb movement and began to read. He did not sit. He did not look away from the words when the sea's spray leapt up and cast a wet stain at the sill. The steward had the sense to stop his recitation and set his quill down. The messenger did not breathe, or so it seemed. Tywin read again, slowly. He folded the parchment back along its original crease with the precision of a man laying out a campaign map. He dismissed everyone with a slight motion. When the gallery had emptied, Tywin stood for a long time with his back to the door and his face to the bright and beating sea. He thought of Tytos and the debtors who had laughed at a Lannister lord, of broken seals and broken oaths and the sting of being a jest. His mouth was stone. His eyes were hard, that older hardness that had little to do with anger and everything to do with resolve. He lit the candle the steward had left, held the parchment to the flame until it licked and blackened the lower corner, and watched until the words curled into smoke that the wind stole. Later, to his brother Kevin, he spoke without obvious heat. "Send men you trust to King's Landing," he said. "Quiet men. Purchase the love of the City Watch's captains with coin that arrives as if of its own accord. Speak with Janos Slint through intermediaries. Instruct Pycelle that his usefulness will be measured in obedience and discretion. Quiet the noisy where you find them. Feed Baelish until he purrs." He paused. "If the Queen's household requires a cask of wine, send 2. Better vintages than Robert can name, though the king cannot name many." Kevin, who had been an obedient man since he had a beard, lifted a brow. "And Jaime? I will speak to Jaime," Tywin said. "Summon him to meet me on the Gold Road, west of the Wendwater. A hawking party would be suitable cover. Send horses thin enough to look like a pastime, and guards fat enough to look like none are needed." He looked past Kevin at the black cliffs. White foam blew into the air like torn letters. "And send a raven to Sunspear. Offer our daughter as a ward and wife. That will give the Martells something to calculate besides the scales in their eyes." Kevin had served his brother long enough to understand that the hardest words would be spoken later and in private. He bowed. "As you wish, Tywin." As he left, Tywin called him back once more. "And hear this. Whatever you have heard whispered of the Queen's children, you have not heard it. We do not repeat them. We bury them under so much gold that even a spider will find the threads heavy." The rendezvous was a manor that had once belonged to a minor house that had forgotten how to be careful. The mulberries were well tended still. A brook spoke softly in the reeds. The hawking party looked like a hawking party. Tywin's falcon took a grouse and Jaime's bird missed its stoop, and for an hour they spoke of nothing with men to hear. Then the men were gone like blown chaff, and father and son walked side by side along the brook. "I threw a boy from a tower," Jaime said at once. It was a confessor's voice, and it sounded wrong coming from him. He had climbed where he should not have been. He saw what he should not have seen. "I thought I could end a single boy instead of ending us all. Perhaps that is what boys are for, to be ended." I don't know. He took breath that smelled faintly of the brook's green edges. I would do it again for her. I am aware, Tywin said. His tone was neither scorn nor consolation. Your letter was clear. Are you going to have me hanged? The hint of levity failed him halfway. He had not expected to ask that question of this man, whose judgment he had lived in as if it were a climate. Tywin stopped walking. The hem of his cloak gathered dust and burrs with equal impartiality. Do you believe that is the game? He asked. You, dangling over a wall while the crowd tosses stones and their children gawk? No, we are not a mummer's show. We are a house with teeth. The problem is not your life. The problem is our name. I have always been your son, Jaime said, softer than he had meant. A son who swore his life to another king when he might have been the king of the West, Tywin said without looking at him. A son who saw kings fall and learned the wrong lesson from it. I do not blame you for loving your sister. Men love the wrong things often. I do blame you for making it our problem in a way that cannot be contained with swords. What would you have me do? Tywin resumed walking. First, you will cease. Completely. The queen will receive other counsel from me and she will obey it. Second, you will attend the king as your oath requires, and above that you will watch him as your blood requires. You will not allow his folly to become our ruin. Third, you will place yourself where questions cannot cling to you. No more whispers in wardrobes and storerooms. You will be seen. Kingsguard are made of display. She will not forgive this, Jaime said. He did not say which part. It did not matter. Cersei's forgiveness is a weather that changes every hour, Tywin said. It is not a thing to navigate by. She will rage. She may weep. She will obey. You think she is yours to command like a mercenary company. I think she is my daughter under my roof, metaphorically if not literally, and I think I am still her father. If she will not listen when spoken to plainly, she will listen when spoken to with consequences. We are no longer at the stage where our house can afford her whims. Jaime laughed once, a brittle sound. You know she will try to outplay you. It is what she knows how to do. Tywin glanced at him, just once. Then she will learn the limits of the board. He meant it. Jaime felt the truth of it like a tremor in the ground before a steeple falls. He had asked Father to fix it. Father would fix it with the same tools he used for everything else. Coin and threat and the certainty that he was right. Catskill certainty, mountain certainty. Jaime kissed the iron ring of his vows in his mind, if nowhere else, and said nothing of love. Cersei did not rage when Tywin's letter reached her. She read it in her private solar with the shutters half closed against the heat and her hair unbound because it pleased her and because she never quite believed anyone could see her unless she allowed it. The letter was very short. Some fathers wrote pages when their children disappointed them. Tywin preferred a few sentences that landed like hammer blows. You will send Myrcella to Sunspear under proper honors. You will temper the king, for now, with sweetmeats rather than sticks. You will not trust that little player of coins at your elbow any farther than you would trust an eel to watch your eels. You will drink only what you pour yourself. You will treat Pycelle as a listening tube, not a brain. And you will end, immediately and forever, the behavior that has invited this letter. I trust one am plain. Tywin. She held the parchment until her nails cut into it. When she burned it over the brazier, the flame licked the last word as if with pleasure. She did not weep. She did not scream. She went to the mirror and looked at the face the realm had learned to admire and fear. She saw that her mouth could become a line hard as any sword when she wished it to. Bring me Lancel, she told her maid, and smiled at herself slowly to make sure the muscles still knew how to obey. Lancel came eager and clumsy, smelling of sweat and hope. She asked him how the king fared, and he poured out what she already knew. That Robert drank in pools and then in lakes, that his hunts had become bloodless affairs where others killed while he watched, that his laughter had something of the desperation of a man telling a joke to himself. He likes the heavy stuff, my queen, Lancel whispered, proud of the knowledge. I mix it in a way he does not taste but feels. Good, she said, stroking his hair as if he were a hound who had brought the right rabbit, and watched him tremble. When he was gone, she stood by the window and looked at the city that belonged to her as surely as the gold lion belonged to her father. She did not believe in limits unless they were chains she could make into jewelry. On the day the king rode to the Kingswood for boar, the air hid heat behind a thin veil of cloud. Robert's laughter was big and false as a sail, but it filled the place and set the hounds to wagging. Lancel poured the wines as he had been taught. Jaime watched from a distance that seemed both too far and far too near. The boar had a mind of its own. So did fate. So did men. When the thing burst from the brush with its low, throaty roar, Jaime's hand tightened on the grip of his sword, not because he feared for Robert, but because of the laugh that came out of Joffrey at the same moment. It was thin and eager and unkind. Jaime watched the king plunge forward and then watched the crimson that came after like a map of a war that had not yet begun. Robert lay swaddled in his own failing heat later. The sweet, animal smell of blood and rot laced the room. Gods, it was the boar's fault, he told Eddard Stark with the good cheer of a man failing on his own terms. The parchment was put into the Lord of Winterfell's hand by a king who did not know kings were not his to give any longer. When Eddard left the chamber, his face looked like a winter field with the grass blades brittle and ready to break. He spoke to no one on his way to the Tower of the Hand. He wrote something with steady strokes and sent a trusted man to find a ship east to Dragonstone. And in that moment he placed a piece upon the board that Tywin had expected and weighed and already begun to knock aside. The City Watch were courted men that week. There were coins that had not existed in their hands before, weighed carefully by wives who stopped complaining about the late hours for a few days. There were gifts that arrived at the barracks, new boots, well-made swords, salted meat, and no one could quite say who had sent them. There were soft words in the ear of Janos Slint, whose wife's sister had begun to dream of a house with glass in the windows. Baelish smiled and played at being the source of the river that watered these small gardens, and sometimes he was, and sometimes he merely stood near enough to look wet. When the day came, his little finger guided the current where it was already going. In the throne room, Eddard Stark tried to be the hinge upon which the realm could swing into honesty. He brought Robert's words with him. He met the Queen's eyes and saw not a woman but a wall. He underestimated the wall, he always had. "I claim the regency for the true heir," he said, and did not say the name he would not say. The gold cloaks, who had been bought by a number larger than the number of truths they could hold in their heads, did not turn their cloaks then. They did not need to. They moved forward like a tide. Lord Peter's mouth had a look of avuncular concern. Lord Varys fluttered and watched. Ser Mandon Moore's face was a white page on which anything might be written. "Do not kill him," Cersei said, sensible as an innkeeper. "We will show mercy, so all the small folk can see what mercy looks like." She smiled without warmth at Eddard as he was brought to the floor. "I am very merciful," she said, and it was true in that moment because she had received a letter telling her to be, and she was a dutiful daughter when it suited her. Joffrey sat the throne as if it irritated him. He wanted to order something bloody. He wanted to see his mother's eyes perform delight. He wanted something that had nothing to do with wanting. He looked at his grandfather's letter, which had come with the Lannister red on it, and did not use it to light a candle. "Take the traitor to the cells," he said. "He will confess his crimes and take the black, and we will show the realm what a good king's forgiveness looks like." He put his hand to his sword hilt because he had learned that boys did that and men admired them. "If he does not confess, I will have his head and place it on a spike with the pigeons. The pigeons should have something to eat." The pigeons ate many things in King's Landing. That day they ate crumbs and the air's dust. Eddard was taken below without spectacle. Sansa screamed and learned how to stop. Arya learned to be a shadow. The city learned nothing it had not always known. Jaime sat in the white of the Kingsguard Hall with Ser Barristan and Ser Aerys and Ser Meryn while the air refused to move. "This is not how honorable men do it," Barristan said at last to no one in particular and to everyone. Jaime held his tongue because he had a father whose letters moved the world. He went to the Queen later and found her pacing like a caged cat. "He will confess," she said. "He will take the black. We will keep the girl." The boy in the north will stay put because his bones are made of duty. We will have time. Father will come. Father did not come at once. Father sent Kevin instead with men who could walk through a crowd without being seen. Father sent letters that arrived like bars falling into place. Father sent ravens that crossed a sky now full of other ravens. The one Stannis had loosed that said the king is dead and the queen's children are false. Those letters blew like ash across the 7 kingdoms. Men tasting them spat or savored or choked. Stannis's ravens fell on Winterfell like black snow. Robb Stark read them with a flush risen high in his cheeks. Catelyn read them with her mouth tight and a look toward the south that began as fear and turned into calculation and turned back. He lies, she said, and even if he does not, the realm is a net of lies already. Robb paced and argued with himself and the room listine. If Father takes the black, we do not make war, he said. We cannot make war on the Night's Watch. In that one sentence Tywin got what he had wanted: time. A north that would not march. A nail pulled from the war's boot. It did not stop Renly from declaring himself with a green cloak and a crown of roses. It did not stop Stannis from counting laws with a counting house precision that took no account of love or hate. In the Reach, women began to weave a new story around Marjorie Tyrell, and they spoke it at wells and in the shade of orchards. In Dorne, Prince Doran sat still as always and watched the dust. The letter that offered Myrcella as a ward arrived in his solar with the soft step of servants who had learned to walk like that. He leaned back and closed his eyes. When he opened them, the weight of the years had returned to his hands. "Send for Arianne," he said, very quiet. "Send for Trystane. Tell them a little girl will come to live among us for a time, and we will teach her the water gardens and the taste of oranges and our patience." In the capital, Cersei watched Sansa Stark learn to smile and bow and forget how to breathe properly. The girl looked at knights as if they might be maps out of captivity and did not understand that knights were walls, not roads. Joffrey grew more brittle and more beautiful and more impatient, a blade left out in winter to gleam and snap. Tommen learned his letters under a maester who feared him no more than one fears a cat. Myrcella went away with a procession Tywin had ordered, and Cersei had planned to the last gem on the last buckle because resembling mercy was a sort of power. Tyrion came because his father commanded it. He came with men that did not look like a company so much as a purse open to the road, and with stories about beds and bad inns and the ways men talk when wine is near. He came with brawn like a shadow with a mouth. He kissed Cersei's cheek and she wiped the air afterward as if his touch had left a mark. "Little brother," she said, and he smiled at her in that way he had that suggested he had just been measuring the furniture. "Where is Father?" he asked. "Playing at castles and bread ovens," she said, cold. "He sends letters about flour and coin and tells me to pour less wine into the king. The king is not a wine jar." She smiled then, more true. "He says many things. I do some of them. Do you?" Tyrion asked, and looked toward the dais as if Joffrey would step out from behind it. "He says you must not try to be clever where clever men are watching." "Perhaps he should have told them not to watch," she said. "What are you to be, then?" "My keeper." "Your hand," he said lightly, and held up his small palm as if the joke were too good to resist. The look she gave him could have shaved a man. Their game began. Tyrion walked the halls with papers and sat in rooms with men who found it hard to know where to place their eyes. He spoke to Varys with a gentleness that made the spider purr, and to Peter with a frankness that made Baelish lean forward like a man drawn to a flame he meant to bottle. He banished one cousin and rewarded another and made a fuss about brothels so that men would speak of that instead of the small number of ships being built in secret at the quays. He visited the pyromancers and listened to their glozing talk and bought it anyway, because sometimes madness came cheap and war made even folly useful. He sent for Chain, an idea that had come to him while watching gulls, and he drew a line across the Blackwater with something that was not iron so much as intention. Jaime told him, over wine, the thing Tyrion had not thought to hear. "Father knows," he said without decoration. "He has known for weeks. He told me to stop." He laughed, not kindly. "He told me to be a knight." Tyrion drank and then did not drink. He thought of Joffrey's mouth. He thought of Sansa looking at the world as if it would give her something back if she looked correctly. He thought of Cersei when she smiled. "Well," he said with a crooked mouth. "That explains the new tone in his letters. He sounds like a miller angry at a rain that won't respect his grinding. He expects us to be dry." "He expects us to be obedient," Jaime said, and lifted his cup and did not put it to his mouth. "He will send me away if he wishes. He will warn me once more, and then he will do something that hurts a part of me that I cannot protect with steel." "Do you love her more than you fear him?" Tyrion asked. Jaime did not answer. He did not need to. In the quiet that followed, both brothers heard the truth. The thing that had made Jaime write to his father had not been fear of Tywin but fear of fire. It occurred to Tyrion that if father wanted to break this, he would break it at the point where it flexed. He would not lash Jaime first, who could be stubborn in the particular way of boys become men under the eye of a man like Tywin. He would lash Cersei where motherhood wrapped around vanity and around power like ivy strangling a tree. He would lash the children only as shadows, never openly. For even Tywin feared the weight of that kind of story. He would lash by moving pieces until the board itself changed. Tywin wrote that he was on the road at last with a force that would look smaller than it was. He wrote that Renly had moved ghosts with banners and laughter and Stannis had moved scowls. He wrote that the Tyrells were an orchard that could be coaxed into feeding any king that promised their roots would be safe. He wrote that the next time Cersei played at trading Sansa's weeping for a small satisfaction, she would find her hands empty. "Do not break Stark," he wrote, the only line in one letter that betrayed a cost. "A live promise is worth 2 dead victories." The letters kept coming until the day they did not, because the man himself rode into the capital with hooves that threw up dust like applause. He took the measure of his grandson with a glance, the way a horseman glances at a mount's hooves before he trusts it to jump. He took the measure of his daughter with a conversation behind a closed door that was quiet enough to make the guards shift from foot to foot in the corridor, as if quiet were a wind that could knock them down. When she left the room, her face was composed. When he left, his was too. The palace as a whole breathed differently, as if the stones had realized they were being watched by eyes that had learned to be cold long before the stones were set. "You will marry the Stark girl when the time comes," Tywin told Joffrey at supper that night, as if he were recommending a sauce. "And you will treat her as if your reign depends upon the small folk's opinion of you. It does." "I am the king," Joffrey said because he could think of nothing else, and then he laughed because he had heard laughter in that sentence before. "You are my grandson," Tywin said softly. "The one does not exclude the other. The second may save the first." He looked at Cersei and she did not look down. "You will sit as regent. You will consult the hand. You will not drink wine that others pour. You will send a gift to the High Septon and speak in public of the gods. In private you will not speak their names. In private you will listen when I speak." Cersei had been told harder things. She drank the wine she poured herself and poured another glass for Joffrey with a tilt that showed she remembered how to obey when being watched. Jaime stood behind the king's chair and felt, strangely, like a piece of furniture. Tyrion lounged with a smile that was not a smile. Kevan watched his brother the way a good man watches a river, alert to its power and to the way it will run where it will. The war that came was different from the one the singers would have sung. The Riverlands did not burn first. The mummers did not gather a Stark lord in a wood and sell him. The North stayed north and fumed and wrote letters. Renly gathered a court of beauty and ease and confidence and marched like a wedding. Stannis gathered righteousness like a chain and took to sea with a woman whose eyes had strange light in them. The Tyrells listened to Renly and trimmed, as men who grow things learn to do, and when Renly's tent was full of a breath that was not the wind and then was empty of a king, they looked at the pieces again. Tywin made sure they saw a different board than they had seen the day before. He went to High Garden with letters that smelled faintly of roses for form and of iron underneath. He spoke to Mace as if he were as important as he wished to be. He spoke to Olenna as if she had always been in the room, which was the right way to speak to her. "Your granddaughter will be queen," he said later, when they were alone with small cakes too delicate to eat. "Not today," Not tomorrow, when the time is right. Until then, the north sends us a bride with all the snow it can carry in her name. Your blossoms will be needed to sweeten this city." Olenna considered him, the way a falcon considers a man who remembers to wear a glove. "What will you do about the boy king's temper?" she asked. "And about the other thing that letters tell? I have seen children who are not what they are claimed. The gods do not punish men like us for that. The gods punish the children." "The gods are very far from here," Tywin said, "and the sept is very close. I will manage the boy. As for letters people tire of reading. We will give them spectacles to watch instead. Spectacles that do not end in our heads on pikes." Tyrion sat the council table and laughed in his sleeve at the thought of Tywin trying to manage Joffrey. He did what he could to turn the king's cruelties into inconveniences. He arranged for small people to carry large messages. He sent ravens at the last possible moment so that when Stannis's black sails showed like a bruise at the mouth of the Blackwater, the wildfire had already been poured into jars and the chain waited beneath the water like a patient serpent. Jaime did not plan. He fought. When Stannis's first ships probed the channel, he was on the river wall with his sword bare, watching the green fire take and climb and take again. He had carried wildfire once under Ares, and the smell of it rose now with an old sting. Men screamed. The sky yelled back. Tyrion's voice rose in the din, small and steady, giving orders men obeyed because they wanted to live. On the far bank, Stannis came on foot like a man who meant to climb the world. His men moved in blocks and broke and moved again. Fire kissed stone. The chain came up and the river became a trap with teeth. Tywin came at the exact moment when men who had not known they could hope learned that they might. He hit Stannis's flank with iron and horses, and the sound of his trumpets made something inside the city breathe again. Later, there were feasts and praise. Joffrey accepted both as if they were made for him by men who did not quite deserve to be in the room while he ate and smiled. Cersei watched too closely. Sansa learned new ways to sit very still and survive. Tyrion counted the cost alone when the candles guttered and found that he had paid in blood and breath. His father spoke a word that might have been commendation and might have been a mere calculation. With Tywin, it was often both. Jaime stood in his white cloak and thought of green fire and of the boy who had fallen and of his father's brow during the one moment of the battle when he had looked like a man who had gambled and only then remembered that he could lose. When they were alone in the Hans Solar, Tywin poured wine for the one person he poured it for, himself. He sat and removed his gloves and set them side by side like two well-trained hounds. "You did well," he told Tyrion, almost absent-mindedly, as if he were listing inventories. "I have always done well for people who do not like me," Tyrion said. "It is practically a talent. You will continue to keep the boy from making a fool of himself in public," Tywin said. "In private, I am not a priest. I do not require miracles. I require results." "What of Sansa Stark?" Tyrion asked, turning the cup in his hands. "How long do we keep a promise walking in a circle in this palace?" "Until the North forgets what it thinks it wants," Tywin said. "Or until it learns to want differently. Or until we have no further use. And if Father Eddard becomes Brother Eddard and writes no letters and asks for no boons and grows quiet as old snow? Then we will keep our word to the letter and none of its spirit," Tywin said. "He takes the black, he stays. That was the bargain we let the boy king make so the streets would stay quiet. The Northmen understand bargains. They will not march for a brother who told them to stay." Tyrion drank. It was good wine. He did not ask who father meant to marry Sansa to when he was done with her as a leash. He suspected his father had two possible grooms in his mind already and would choose whichever injured someone usefully at the right time. Cersei grew restless. It was not an uncommon state, but now it had edges. She watched Marjorie Tyrell arrive with manners like silk and a face that did whatever the room needed it to do. She watched Joffrey come alive in the presence of praise he had not imagined. She watched her father watch all of it. She felt the net tighten around her wrists and told herself it was lace. She sent for Pycelle and he came, dribbling flattery the way a cracked jar dribbles oil. She sent for Qyburn quietly, out of old habit of keeping strange instruments in a bag no one else knew she carried. She watched Tyrion's games, and sometimes she laughed, and sometimes she wanted to put her fingers into his eyes and push. Jaime watched her and did not go to her at night. He obeyed, because he had told himself he would, and because disobedience now would be less love than stubbornness. He took to walking the Red Keep's lower passages in the hours when the torches were low and the guards slumped against the walls with boredom. He found the room where the skulls of the old kings lay in their ordered darkness, the dragon bones black and resting. The hall smelled of old ash and old secrets. He stood there longer than was comfortable, with a man's laughter echoing somewhere in his memory. Aerys's laughter, Robert's laughter, his own sometimes. The skulls began all to look alike. He touched one absent-mindedly, a caress that had nothing to do with tenderness and everything to do with needing to touch something that could not be moved with letters. Father found him there once. Tywin's footfalls did not announce him loudly. They never had. He stood with Jaime among the dead kings and looked at nothing, as if he planned to add something to the collection. Aerys would have liked this place, he said, which was almost a joke. It made Jaime's throat tighten. He did, Jaime said. There was a time he visited often enough. Tywin did not look at him. I could have had your vows released the week the boy took the throne, he said. He would have done as he was told then. He is less pliant now, and less likely to do anything that seems like a kindness to his mother's brother. The realm whispers enough already, and Joffrey listens when he should not. You could have had me leave the Kingsguard, Jaime said, startled enough to say it like a boy who has learned he might be allowed to sit at the grown men's table. I considered it, Tywin said. I do not like throwing away a sword that suits a hand, even if the hand sometimes has its own opinions. In any case, I chose not to. The appearance of things matters, and you appear to be exactly where you ought to be. I prefer appearances that do not have to be explained. He looked then, the full weight of his face turning toward his son. You have done as I told you. For once, Jaime said lightly, though the words felt tight. For this, once is sufficient. Tywin turned away. Your queen, our queen, will take a new household of companions. They will be chosen by me. Your knights will be your own. See that you do not fill them with what you ought not. Jaime pictured Lady Tina, smiling like a sharp shell. He pictured guards who owed their lives to Tywin. He pictured Cersei trying to bend them all to her will and, failing, trying to break them. He felt pity for them and could not say for whom that pity was intended. You will make her a prisoner in her own chambers, he said. I will make her a queen, Tywin said. Sometimes those things are the same. The news from Dorne arrived like a breeze from a hotter room. Myrcella wrote letters in a careful, proud hand about water gardens and games with children who did not fear her. She is happy, Cersei said aloud, and meant it as a complaint because the girl was far and because the happiness belonged to somebody else's walls. Tywin nodded once and set the letter aside. Good, he said. A happy hostage is a better hostage. Sansa Stark came into womanhood and learned to dread being noticed. She learned it in slow lessons as women do. A look that lingered, a word that cut where it could not be seen, a kindness that carried a hook. She learned to watch the way Joffrey's mood changed when a room did not please him. She learned to pray without expecting a reply. When Tyrion spoke to her, he did so with a courtesy that annoyed her even as it soothed. When the Hound spoke to her, she listened because his words carried truth like an unpleasant smell. When Cersei spoke to her, she learned to hear the absence of comfort in comfort. Do you love him? Cersei asked once, very mild. You are to be a queen. The small folk will want a story. Sansa had read stories all her life. She made her mouth form the shape of a yes and could not fill it with sound. That is enough, Cersei said. You will practice. On a winter-cool morning, a raven brought word that Stannis had retreated to Dragonstone with his gods and his grief and his justice. The river had been a mouth that bit him. The land had not loved him. Tywin went to the sept and knelt and did not pray. He rose and gave alms that fed a neighborhood. He walked home with his hands behind his back, thinking of boats and harvests and payrolls. In the Great Hall, he told Joffrey that the city would hold a festival that lasted 3 days. Bread would cost half as much and the butchers would give scraps to anyone who stood in line. The boy king blinked and agreed to it because he liked it when the crowds shouted his name and because he liked the way Marjorie looked when she lifted her hand with the ring of a queen not yet a queen on it. "Am I to be replaced?" Cersei asked father in the quiet after. She did not look at him when she asked, because that seemed to seed something. She looked at the window and at the city that had been hers. "Not yet," Tywin said. "We are not a house that breaks a promise in a week because a new promise offers. The Tyrell girl is an ally. Allies are useful when not made into wives too soon." He paused. "And we promised the North a thing, and we will keep it until we are ready to tell them a different thing." "You mean to keep me waiting under your hand until you are ready to take my son's bride from my son?" Cersei said softly. "You are very good at making it seem as if your cruelty is a kind of wisdom." "I am very good at winning," Tywin said. "That has always been the business of our house." She smiled then, and it was like a cut made with a clean blade. "We will see," she said. She sent for Qyburn again. She sent for Pycelle and made him shake as he promised to do nothing she did not understand. She sent Lancel away and then sent him for small tasks that made him feel large. She left a cup of wine where her father might drink it in. Dee then poured it out herself and laughed and had the cup replaced with another and did not tell herself why she had done it. She moved her pieces and found that the board had shrunk. It is difficult to win when the walls move inward. Tyrion was summoned to Tywin's solar on a morning when the sunlight at the window looked like old gold. His father stood by the table that held the realm like a toy, a map drawn by men who thought lines could keep men honest. "I will give you a wife," Tywin said without preamble. "You will do your duty." "My duty?" Tyrion asked in a way that made it an invitation for ridicule and an acceptance disguised as jest. "To our house," Tywin said. "You will take a woman who will bring us a piece of north that is not snow." "Ah," Tyrion said, "and let the sound do most of the work. And my sister's leash? Will you loosen it? Or will you ask me to hold the other end while you pull?" "Your sister will be managed," Tywin said. "Joffrey will be married in time, but not to the Stark girl. He will need a bride who plants him in soil that does not freeze." He said it as if giving weather reports. "The Stark girl will be placed where she does more work for us unwed than wed. When the time comes, she will marry someone of our choosing. Perhaps you, perhaps not. She is a key. Keys are not given away because they are pretty." He watched Tyrion's face as one watches a door to see if a lock turns. "I always hoped to be loved for my charm," Tyrion said lightly. "But I suppose doors are a kind of romance." He left the room thinking of Sansa's eyes in the moments before she remembered to smile. He thought of his own face in the mirrors others held for him. He thought of his father's mouth when it said managed. Jaime took to riding the practice yard at dawn. He fought with Ser Ares, with Ser Boros, with the boy whose name he never bothered to remember because the boy's sword arm made names irrelevant. He found that the lack of Cersei made everything else clearer and also blurred everything. He was less often angry. He was more often empty. He dreamed sometimes of the boy from the tower, and in his dream he did not catch the boy by the wrist and pull him up to safety and hear the boy's sob turn into a sob of relief. In his dream he watched the boy fall again and again until the stone did not admit him and he skittered forever like a leaf on stone. One night he found himself once more in the dragon's skull room, and Cersei was there, her cloak a dark pool around her, her hair undone. She did not startle. She did not move. "You think father has won," she said. It was not a question. "I think father has postponed losing," he said, "which is more than most men manage." She laughed, abruptly, and the sound climbed the room and sank back down like ash. "I have lost you," she said. "You never had me," he said without heat. "You had yourself reflected in my eyes. That is not the same thing." She slapped him before could think to not let her. The sound was small in that big dark. "I had you," she said, almost conversational. "I will have you again." He looked at her face, the face that had been his first idol and his last addiction. and saw at last that Tywin had never been the only one to mistake possession for love. He stepped back. "We will keep the children," he said. "We will keep them alive. We will do nothing else together." "Do you think he will let Joffrey live if it becomes inconvenient?" she asked suddenly, and there it was, the thing she feared. Not shame, not loss of power, not even the shrinking of the world around her. She feared, finally, as mothers do. "He will never let our name be a joke," Jaime said after a beat. "As long as Joffrey helps with that, he lives." It was a terrible truth to put plainly. It was also the only comfort he had to give. The months ground on. The city learned to live with fewer beggars and more banners. The tales people told in the wine sinks changed shape. Less about fallen kings, more about weddings that might come. Stannis sent letters that read like grindstones and gave men headaches. Renly's ghost whispered in fields. The Riverlands kept their harvest. Winter crept closer without drama. The North wrote fewer letters because the man who would have written them had taken a vow that turned him into a shape that did not belong beneath roofs. It ended as such things often do, not with a blaze but with the stubbornness of small choices accreting into fate. Joffrey wanted a spectacle to celebrate the first feast of winter, because he liked to see the city look at him with all its eyes. He wanted the dwarfs to fight and the singers to sing and the maidens to throw flowers that would be swept up by brooms before any but he could enjoy them. Tywin allowed the spectacle because he believed in bread and circuses when the ovens were running and the players were cheap. He sat beneath the red and gold canopy and watched numbers become smiles and smiles become a kind of loyalty that could be counted as long as the counting was careful. Olenna Tyrell watched as well, and her mind pursed its lips. Marjorie placed her hand where the light loved it. Cersei sat like a carved thing and smiled when the city looked. Tyrion measured cups and moved them in ways that seem idle when they are not. Sansa folded her hands and told herself a story about winters that end. The king rose in the middle to declare something foolish and then something cruel. Tywin's gaze pinned him back to his chair without a word. The boy sulked and remembered to smile for Marjorie. The cup changed hands twice. Someone was careful. Someone else was careful in a different way. It would have taken very little to have made that night one of those the singers never stop singing. It took more to make it another night in a long line of nights that led toward a place no one quite saw until they were at the edge. After the feast, Father called his sons to him. He looked more tired than a man like him preferred to look. He set his goblet down with a soft sound. "We will announce the betrothal to Marjorie in the new year," he said. "The North has not moved. The Martells are quiet because they are guarding something they will not name, as they always are. Stannis gnaws a bone. We will give him nothing to grip. Joffrey will throw a tantrum in private," Tyrion prompted, because the silence seemed to expect a joke, and he was good at those. "He will," Tywin said. "You will endure it. And you," he looked at Jaime, "will keep your oath in the days when keeping it seems useless. Those are the days that matter. When all this is finished, you will have choices again." It was the closest he had ever come to saying a kind thing to either of them, and he made it sound like an order so it would not insult anyone. The wind rattled the shutters. The fire dipped and then recovered. Jaime saw, suddenly and with horrifying clarity, that his father might die one day and leave him to discover the shape of the world without the great weight holding it down. He had never considered the possibility with any seriousness. Tywin had been the weather, the ground. The idea of the world without him felt like a cliff bathed in fog. He slept poorly that night and dreamed of a sky piled with bones that looked like letters. He dreamed of a boy falling. He dreamed of ashes in a brazier and a face seen in the smoke that was his father's face, expressionless. In the morning, he woke to a city that had learned to breathe in time with another man's heart. He buckled on his sword and went to stand behind a boy who was a king. He watched the way the light found Cersei's hair and did not go to her. He watched Tyrion speak and make a thing into its opposite with only words. He watched his father leave the hall with his hands behind his back and his steps measured, as if he was counting something important and invisible. It might have gone differently. A woman who was not the queen might have poured a different cup. A dwarf might have tripped. A boy might have laughed at the wrong moment and choked. A father might have taken a different road to the privy and met a son that hated him enough to pull a trigger on a crossbow. In another year, in another winter, in another telling, those things might have happened. They did not happen now. The letter had been sent. The board had changed. The heavy hand lay on it still. When snow fell at last, hesitant and then sure, it covered the city's scars with a whiteness that made people lift their faces and open their mouths to taste it. Sansa stood in a courtyard and let the flakes catch on her lashes like feathers. Joffrey frowned at the cold and stalked back into the heat. Cersei watched the city take the weather like a blessing and thought of gods. Tyrion turned the snowflake on his glove into a joke and then into a calculation. Jaime tilted his head back and felt the cold bite his skin, felt something clean and unsparing and temporary. Tywin walked out onto the balcony of the Han Solar and looked at the rooftops powdered into a new map and decided that it was time to send a letter to the Eyrie. He wrote the letter himself, though he preferred to dictate, because the thing he was asking was delicate. He did not write about love or gods or justice. He wrote about grain and roads and the way mountains make men stubborn and generous in equal measure. He wrote because winning is a season and seasons turn. When the wax cooled under his ring, he watched it go dull. He lifted it to the light and saw the lion there, relentless even when small. Later, in the dragon room, Jaime stood alone. He touched the skull again and wondered whether, in some room beneath some other city, another man stood with his hand on a bone and tried to learn from the dead. He lowered his head and spoke to no one. "Keep them," he said, and meant Joffrey and Tommen and Myrcella and maybe himself. "Keep them in the world, at least, while it turns." The skull said nothing. Men do not get answers from those who cannot betray them. Jaime smiled without amusement and left the room and went to stand behind a boy who would one day be told he was marrying a different girl than the one he had been promised first. He went to stand behind a mother who had lost the future she thought was hers and refused to bend, because bending had never been in the instructions she carried inside her skin. He went to stand where he had been told to stand because he had chosen that once and would not lie to himself about it now. The day came when Myrcella's next letter spoke of the way oranges taste in winter, brighter, as if defying somebody. The day came when Stannis's ravens arrived again, and men read them and then looked up at the snow as if it could answer. The day came when Tyrion found a way to make Peter Baelish smile in a way that said he had been tricked and would pretend otherwise. The day came when Tywin looked in a mirror and saw the years and knew, with a precise and private calculation, how many were left him if the gods kept their bargain with no one. He went on writing letters. He went on moving men. He went on holding the world steady with his will because he believed that if he let go, it would slide. When spring ticked its hour at last, when the river ran faster and the markets smelled like fish and green things, the realm found itself in a place it did not expect. There was no north come down like a spear. There was no red wedding in a hall where men had trusted bread. There was no leal bannerman with a wolf for a heart dead in a ditch with his mother's prayer in the air like torn silk. There were other dead and other ditches. There always are. But the great wound had not been cut where it had been cut before, and so the healing that would come someday would make a different scar. The secret remained a secret and also did not, because secrets that matter rarely stay clean. Men told stories in which 3 golden-headed children had eyes like a twin mirror and laughed too much like one man to be another's. Men told stories in which that man had saved a city with fire once and might have lit it again if the wind had blown differently. Men in brothels and in septs and at the foot of walls and in the backs of kitchens told the stories the way people have always told them, to make themselves braver or wiser or less afraid. One night Jaime walked the wall and looked out over a city that belonged to his house because of a letter he had sent and 1,000 things that had followed it, and to his siblings because of choices made in rooms behind doors and under blankets, and to his father because of a mind that made other men's choices into roads. He thought of the boy falling, last, and found that the sound came to him like the memory of a song one has learned to sing without liking it. He did not pray, not being a man for whom prayers made sense. He told the air a story instead. In it there were a father and a mother and a lover and a son and a city and a river and a room full of bones and a letter. The letter arrived. The father acted. The city did not fall the way it had. There were other falls and other letters and other fathers. The gods, if they had listened, would have heard the truth beneath the story. There is always a letter, and everything depends on when it is sent and who reads it, and what they tell themselves about love to make the answers bearable. In another part of the Red Keep, Tywin set out 3 stones upon his desk. 1 black, 1 white, 1 red. He liked the simplicity of them. He placed the black upon a spot on the map and then moved it a finger's breadth to the left. There, he said to no one, and it was not victory so much as work. It would have to do. It always had. The ravens had flown ahead of Eddard Stark like scouts, their shadows crossing the white where the King's Road narrowed to a knife along the woods. By the time he reached the wall, the news of his coming had settled along the battlements and in the yards and the kitchens, in the way people stood a little straighter when he passed and then looked away as if the sight burned. The ice rose before him, not a wall but a world, a blue-black mile of winter driven upright, slow breath steaming from its face. He had seen it when he was a boy and a young lord and a father. It did not change. He had. The black cloak lay across his shoulders like a knight laid by a careful hand. Jeor Mormont came to meet him at the foot of the steps that led into the yard. The old bear's beard rhymed with frost, though it was not yet the worst of the season. His eyes were the same. Shrewd, tired, too used to the cold. "Lord Stark," he said, with that half-gruffness that made courtesy sound like something one might chew. "Brother," Eddard said, and the word did its work in both of them. It stripped titles and left a vow that men keep when there is little else left to keep. He grasped Mormont's forearm and felt the bone beneath the leather. "I come to take the oath." "Best sooner than later," Mormont said. "We do it by the heart tree. Maester Aemon is eager to see you. He likes to measure time by the sake of old names." He glanced past Eddard, taking stock of the few men who had come north with him. A silent Liber, a craggy bee from Molestown, the boy from the kitchens who had asked to be a runner because he wanted to be anything else. The Lord Commander jerked his chin toward the yard. "We'll feed you first. The wall eats men. It does not starve them. After, you'll say your words and be what you meant to be once." He said the words in the light of the weirwood's red leaves, the bark white and smooth as a shard of ice in a stream. He spoke them softly because he had said vows before. Marriage vows, vows of fealty, the old words woven in the snow when a boy is shown what it is to stand. He did not try to make the sound carry. The gods heard what they wished. Jon stood beside him, black-cloaked and spare, all long angles and new gravity, and Eddard felt his own life turning again as if someone had taken the wheel that had been turning under him without his consent and given him one steady spoke to hold. Later, in the warmth of the Lord Commander's solar, Maester Aemon laid his thin hand across Eddard's wrist and smiled without teeth. "Men come to the wall seeking to become somewhat smaller," the old man said. "It is a kind of peace. The great lords do not fit into these halls easily." "I have no lordship," Eddard said, and found that the saying of it made breath flow more easily in his chest, like a garment cut loose. He had always been a plain man. The world had dressed him in things. The wall undressed him again. Aemon's blind eyes turned toward the direction he seemed to prefer when he thought. "You carry men inside you regardless. Sons, daughters, a city that nearly cut your truth away to wear itself. The weight remains. We will set some of it down here if we can." Jon sat at the long table that night with the other stewards and rangers. His cloak looked new next to Eddard's. He had been washing it with snow, and it had learned the shape of his shoulders. He listened when his father spoke with Mormont of the state of the stockpiles, of the scabby way the oats had come out of their sacks in the last month, of the way the wind from the west had changed its bite. He listened, and later he walked out into the yard, and Eddard went with him because that was a conversation men have with their bodies before their mouths catch up. "You look older," Jon said at last, a little startled by his own boldness. "I mean," he swallowed, "you look right. I look like a man who has not slept well in some time," Eddard said and smiled, a clean break in the quiet. "I have things to say to you, and I will say some of them tonight and some later, not all at once. Men are not jars to be poured full in an hour." He looked up. The wall took up half the sky in that yard, and the other half belonged to the stars. "For now," I am here, and your brothers will be my brothers. If I speak sharply at times, it will be because I see a thing I have seen before and do not wish to see again." Jon nodded. He put his hand to the hilt at his hip because it was an old habit and because it steadied him. "I saw the city break people," he said quietly. "It broke honor in ways I didn't think honor could break. I did not know what to do. You kept your word." Eddard's voice held a warmth that came from farther south than the wall but managed to find its way there anyway. "And you kept breathing when it would have been easier to do something else. Those are not small feats." He wanted to tell the boy, no, the young man, what he had carried for years. Names. A promise made in a room that smelled of hot blankets and iron. The way Lyanna had gripped his hand and looked past him at something he could not see. He had thought he might tell it in King's Landing someday, if the time was right and the right ear was there. Then he had thought he would never tell. Now he thought again. The words were a living thing in his chest. They had learned to sleep curled and they had learned to wake. Not tonight. Not with so many other eyes and ears and needs clamoring in his head. He reached and briefly put his hand on the back of Jon's neck, as he had done when the boy was small and had split his lip on the low fence by the kennels and had not cried at first and then had. Jon stood very still and breathed. They were interrupted by the arrival of Yoren with a trickle of new men. Smeared boys and one or two hard-faced elders who had run out of other roads. The old recruiter looked as if he had been thrown down a hill made of nettles and got up again and laughed and kept moving. "Lord," he said, because old habits were habits all the same. He jerked his head toward one of the smaller shadows behind him. "This one's got a tongue on him and a way with a stick. Says his name is Aery." His eyes slid sideways toward Jon and then to Eddard and then to the ground. "Looks like trouble if trouble looks back." The bundle that was Aery lifted its head. The face that showed under the hood was pinched and brave and made of angles that had not learned to soften. Eddard knew it before Jon did. He felt his throat close and open. "Arya," he said, and did not realize he had said the name aloud until the yard turned its head and Yoren sighed and scratched his beard and muttered something about vows and the seven and the things men do out of love. They stood in the armory because it had warmth and because the steel on the walls made a kind of company that reminded a man who he was. Arya stood between them, her hands grubby and proud, the cut on her knuckle nearly healed, her hair hacked to a practical length. "I was coming to find you," she said, staring up at Eddard with eyes that had always been too large for a girl who loved to run. "I didn't want to go to Winterfell. Not without." She looked at Jon. That broke him. He stepped forward and she collided with him so hard the breath blew out of both of them. They made a small sound between them that was not speaking. Eddard let them have it. He turned his face away and studied a rack of spears and the way the light fell on them and ordered himself not to be a fool. When he turned back, Arya had found the place in Jon's arms where she fit and stood away and wiped her nose on the back of her hand and tried to look fierce. "I learned things," she said defiantly. "Syrio taught me. Yoren taught me. Some men tried to teach me to be afraid, and I didn't learn that. I would have had you at Winterfell under your lady mother's roof," Eddard said gently, and watched the words hit the girl's jaw and bounce off. "We will write to her. We will make arrangements. The wall is not a place for—" "I'm not a lady," Arya said, not with an adolescent's scorn but with a soldier's certainty. "Not like Sansa. I'm not her. I can run in the snow. I can carry water. I can learn to shoot better. I can climb." "She can," Jon said, and the way he said it made Eddard hear all the years between them. "She can learn." The Lord Commander listened with half an ear when Eddard made his case later and shrugged one big shoulder. "We are short of hands," Mormont said. "We are always short of hands. If a girl can do a man's work, let her. We have had washerwomen in black cloaks before in wild times. Put her under a watchful eye. There are worse fates than being useful." Arya glowed and bit down on it so hard her teeth must have ached. She was given a job that involved buckets and snow and boots, and soon men learned that if you had a thing to be taken from one place to another and you did not want to think about it again, you could ask the small Stark girl and she would do it with an expression that said she'd chosen it herself. She shadowed the Bowmen and the Fletchers. She tried to get a bowstring on and gloves and failed and took them off and got it right and refused to shiver. Sometimes at night Eddard stood on the wooden walkway that creaked along the inside of the wall and looked down at the lanterns in the yard and up at the lights of the stars and found the difference between them exquisite and also not the point. Jon joined him more often than not. They spoke in short sentences the way men do when the wind steals words. "I remember," Eddard said once, "the sound of your feet in the snow when you were small. You tried to be quiet, but your laughter gave you away." Jon smiled and did not look down because the drop did not forgive men who made mistakes. His father almost told him then. He had the words in his mouth and the air seemed to have paused just enough to receive them. Then there were horns from the west watchtower, one long and one short and then one again, and the night closed around them with purpose. They both turned and went down, hands already on hilts, and that too was a kind of speaking. The reports came in pieces the way reports always do. A party of rangers who had found a village burned and cold as if the fire had had no heat. A man with wildling scars who swore by a god with a weirwood face and blue candles that there was a king gathering beyond the frostfangs. A king of men who wore no crown and needed none. A bag of obsidian blades found buried beneath a ring of stones that looked like they had been placed by hands patient enough to do it right. Samwell Tarly brought the last with shaking hands and a flush of pride. "Dragonglass," he said in a rush, and Jon clapped him on the shoulder and Arya listened with her eyes and Eddard took the blade and felt a cold that was not the wall's cold look up at him. "We'll range," Mormont said, frowning toward the maps, his finger tracing the old paths that men had stomped into habits. "We'll go light and we'll go steady. Stark, I won't keep you behind a desk. You can speak for me as needed, but your sword will be where it does the most good. Boy," this to Jon without turning his head, "you'll stay. I need stewards who can count and read and run when I say run. There are assignments that feel like insults and assignments that turn into the making of a man." Jon swallowed the first and held out his hand for the second. "Aye, Lord Commander." Qhorin Halfhand came down from the shadow tower with his hair gone whiter and his voice as spare as always. He greeted Eddard with a smile that was not warm and not cold. It was simple honesty. "We can't stand and wait," he said in the hall when the winter light was failing. "Mance Rayder gathers more than raiders. He's gathering the parts of a country. You can smell it." "You want to cut the smell," Eddard said. "I want to know where they mean to come." Qhorin's hand made a gesture like water slipping between stones. "They always come where a thing is weak. I want to look at our weak places before they do." His eye slid to Jon then and then back to Eddard. "I'll take one or two with me who can move and who can keep their tongues. I take this one." He meant Jon. "He hears with his eyes." Eddard felt the old resistance rise and stand. "He is my..." He stopped himself and made the sentence into something else. "He is sworn to the Lord Commander's service." "I'll borrow him," Qhorin said. "I'll return him if I can." The talk became a stone with an argument wrapped around it. Mormont paced and swore. Eamon listened. Sam looked down at his hands and then up at Jon and then at Eddard with a face that could not decide what courage looked like. Arya stood behind a barrel and tried not to be obvious. In the end, because ends come and do not always make people happy, Mormont nodded. "Go. If you see the king beyond the wall, do not introduce yourselves." Jon looked at his father the way he had looked at him when he was small and asking for a horse that could throw him. "I'll do what needs doing," he said softly. "Do it with your eyes open," Eddard said. He set his hand on Jon's shoulder and felt the bones beneath. "And come back." Qhorin moved like a thought through falling snow. They left at dawn when the sun was a pale promise that had not settled its mind. Ghost ranged ahead, white and red against white and red, a thing the snow learned to get out of the way for. The world was quiet except when it wasn't. They found prints like arrows pointing. They found old fires that had burned cleanly and left a lesson. They found a girl with hair the color of dead bracken who loosed an arrow that went wide. Jon brought her down with a tackle that left them both gasping. "Ygritte," she said, fierce as if she were giving him an order. "My name." He let her stand and take up her bow and then did not let her shoot again. It was an exchange the Wild knew. They let her go at Qhorin's nod. because no one keeps what will not be kept in that country. She watched them go and smiled with half her mouth and then did not smile. That night, with the cold making a sound in the pines like a distant sea, Corin spoke the plan aloud, and it sat between them like another man at their small fire. "You'll have to go to them," he said to Jon. "To Mance. I can bring you close. When they find us, and you will turn on me. Not in jest. They must believe it. They will put you by a fire and try you with warmth and food and a woman's laugh and a way to live that is not this. You will remember what this is and come back with your feet under you." Jon said and stopped. He looked at the smoldering coal at the edge of the fire like a red eye. "I swore to the Watch. The Watch needs eyes." Corin's voice did not change. Eddard would have said no if he had been there. He would have said something about lines and the ways in which men blur them to save other men and then forget what they can't afford to forget. Jon did not have him there. He had Corin and the cold and the idea of the men behind him and a father's hand that had pressed his shoulder and then had lifted. He nodded once. They did not tell Eddard where and when, because that is how plans like this work. They only work if they are not known. Eddard knew the shape of them anyway when the first horn blew and then the second, from the Watch on the West Road. He went to the yard with the others, already calculating what he could and could not afford to lose. He sent Arya to the kitchens because that is where the water was, and because no story of his would begin with his daughter underfoot in a yard full of panic. She went, and then a little later she came back with her arms full of skins and her face set because she had chosen a story in which she did not cower. Corin did not return. The news came in pieces, borne on the breath of men who had seen too much and learned to speak only what they must. Jon did not come with them. There was a report, quiet as a blade being slipped into a sheath. A fight. A boy against a man who was in on his own death. Eddard stood very still while the words found the place in him that fit them. He had no right to be angry. He had told Jon to be a man and to do what needed doing. He was angry anyway, and it burned low and steady and was not for the boy. Mance moved. It was not a raider's foray. It was a world gathered up and set to walking. Fires burned beyond the wall in lines that made shapes when seen from on high. Drums spoke in a language older than the towers. The first men to hit the gate did so laughing. That was when everyone died in the stories told in the South. At the wall, men bent to the work. Oil was heated. Rocks were rolled to the lip of the world and given their orders. Arrows hissed. Eddard found that his hands remembered the way to make men move with words and stayed behind the right line. Mormont bellowed like a bull and men obeyed because they could not do anything else. Sam ran and did not fall. Gren fired and fired again and did not think of whether he hit because the hitting was a matter for another hour. Arya appeared at Eddard's elbow once, and he would have roared if he had breath to waste. She vanished and reappeared where the men at the kettles had failed and took hold and poured when the word came and did not weep at the sound below. Jon returned as the third sun came up and the ice was blue as old knives. He came out of the woods at a lope, Ghost at his heel and a ring of men around him whose furs were heavy with frost and whose faces were carved into the solemnity the wild has when it is not laughing. He was thinner and his eyes had learned a new stillness. He went to Eddard with a movement like a man approaching a weirwood. Cautious, reverent, unapologetic. "They will try the tunnels," he said before Eddard could say anything that would do neither of them any good. "They have giants. They have too many fires. They are tired and hungry, and the hunger makes them brave and stupid. But they are many. Mance means to climb the world. Even if we break them at the gate, there will be more. We will hold," Eddard said, because men needed someone to say it, and because in that moment he believed it the way men believe anything they are willing to die for. He drew Jon's head down for a heartbeat the way he had when the boy was small and let him go. They held. The first push broke like a wave on rocks. The second did more damage because men tire and fear builds a crust that sometimes cracks under heat. The third came at night when the wind turned and all the fires beyond the forest seemed to move. The giants came with their huge shoulders rolling and their eyes like stones. Eddard learned the particular way a giant falls when you send something heavy down into the mass behind it. He learned the sound a mammoth makes when it balks at a tunnel and chooses a different life. There were men shouting prayers that had nothing to do with the September. There were men who said nothing and did, and then bled, and then were folded into the dark, and their friends kept working because that is what men do who have decided a place is theirs to keep. Stannis came on the 5th day, and the trumpets were the sort of surprise that feels inevitable once it arrives. The north wind had been carrying the taste of the sea for hours. Eddard had not known what to call it until he saw sails where no sails had a right to be. The king's banners did not delight anyone on the wall, but they made a sound in the throat all the same. The line of wildlings that had been preparing to try the gate again faltered as the horsemen came through the pines like a black river. The touch was precise. The flanks buckled. Someone shouted a command that no one followed. Men ran. Men do. After, there was a place where the snow had been churned to something like bread in a bowl, and men stood looking at each other like strangers at a wake. Stannis Baratheon rode with a face that wore severity like a helm. He did not look around for applause. He did not look for anyone at all. He dismounted with the careful economy of a man whose joints hurt and walked into the yard with Davos Seaworth at his elbow and Melisandre standing behind him like a shadow that had learned to be warm. Jeor Mormont met him with a formality the watch keeps as a defense. Words were exchanged, the kind that weigh more than they sound like they do. "Your Grace," the old bear said. He did not bend. "You have done the realm a service." "I do the realm the service that is mine to do," Stannis said. He did not wait to be announced. He entered the Lord Commander's solar as if it had been built for him. His eyes found Eddard as if he had always known where the Stark would stand. They looked at one another the way two men might look across a cold river they both must cross. Measuring, wary, unsurprised. Davos looked between them and saw only the cost. Melisandre tilted her head and seemed to be listening for something behind their voices. "Lord Stark," Stannis said. He remembered to call the man brother and did not. "You wrote a letter." "I did," Eddard said. "You spoke of a war that is not mine and made it mine," Stannis said, and there was a small quiver deep in the sentence that might have been the thought of Dragonstone in winter and a girl named Shireen with a book in her lap. "You asked me to fight a thing without a crown. I asked you to fight the thing that will wear any crown if we let it," Eddard said. "We can settle the matter of whose chair is whose when men's bones are not making walls farther south." He held Stannis's gaze because he knew he would find no warmth there, and so there was no use looking. "You have done the needed thing." Stannis made a sound that might have been a laugh if a laugh could be made into a blade. "I have done the lawful thing," he said, because he must name it so. "There will be more to do. The wildlings will not stop. Not because we beat them once. The cold will not stop. The Red Woman says." He stopped and did not look back at Melisandre. "She says that the true war has begun. It began long ago," Maester Aemon said softly from his corner where he had sat as if he'd been carved there. "Men like to think they start wars. It is vanity." He lifted his blind face toward Stannis as if he saw him better than men with sight. "You have done what kings are made to do when they are well made. That is enough for a day." Later, when the yard had emptied a little and the men had begun to remember that food existed and that sleep could be had, Stannis walked the lower passages with Eddard, their breath visible before them like scouts. Davos kept pace a little behind. Melisandre disappeared without anyone seeing her go. The way flames will when the wind takes them. "I did not come to make peace with your boy king," Stannis said into the frost. "I came for the law. I have not forgotten that." "You have not forgotten anything," Eddard said. "It was not meant kindly. It was not unkind. The law is your sword. Use it when there is a man in front of you and his sword is drawn. Use it when there is no one. Here there are things the law does not name." "Then name them," Stannis said with his sudden heat. "You are very good at naming things with your northern silence. The cold that walks. The hunger that uses men like kindling. A thing that will turn the world into a place where your law cannot be said aloud because the air will not hold it." Eddard stopped and turned. "I did not ask you here to kneel to a throne you despise. I asked you here to fight. You have done that. You will do it again. When the fighting is done, we can cut this knot between us or learn to live with it. I cannot advise you to either. You advise me not at all, Stannis said, and there was something almost like relief in it. Good. I have a dislike for counsel that feels like pleas. Davos said nothing until they were nearly at the yard again, and then cleared his throat in that way he had. Begging your grace's pardon, but there is the matter of the boy with the wildlings, he said. If the tale's true. It is, Eddard said, and the admission cut him oddly, the way a fine blade leaves a neat wound that bleeds later. He did what he had to, because we asked him to be the sort of man who does that. And what sort of man is that? Davos asked softly, but Stannis made a noise and the question was folded and put away. In King's Landing, the snow came as rumor before it came as weather. Marjorie Tyrell sent bread out to the lines at the bakeries and made sure the bakers' wives knew who had sent it. Joffrey threw a fit about something that did not matter and then was sweet to the Tyrell girl in public because he liked the way the shouts sounded when they were a little frightened. Cersei held herself tighter as if someone had laced her into a dress made of orders. The hand held counsel. That was what he called it even in his own head. Not a counsel which had pomp but the act, a thing men do. He watched Olenna Tyrell eat candied orange peel and pretend it had cost her nothing. We will announce a betrothal at the turn of the year, Tywin said, and made the words into a law by the way he said them. We will keep what promises we can and break those that do us harm in the manner that does us least harm. The North has accepted that its lord wears black. The girl is no longer needed for the Boy King's story. The girl has another story waiting for her, Olenna said, and smiled without blinking. A green and pleasant story with gardens in it. My grandson has a leg that will not keep him from riding if the horse is patient. She will be very good for him. He has a sweetness that will be good for her if the gods wish it. She is a key, Lord Hand, but there are other locks than doors. Tyrion had gone to the Gods' Wood that morning that the Red Keep kept in a pot on a terrace as a joke and had learned to dislike jokes that try too hard. He knew the Tyrells wanted Sansa. He knew because he had ears and because he had one woman in his bed who heard things while untying knots and another who could not be kept out of any room for long. He told his father without drama. Tywin listened and his face did not move. That was drama enough. They will not have her, Tywin said. We will keep that key. He looked at Tyrion then the way a smith looks at a horseshoe that will do for now. You will marry her. There was no need to pull anyone from the hall to witness his son's expression. It did what it would do. Tyrion drank and the wine sat in his mouth because it could not decide whether to soothe or sting. With all the gratitude a son can muster, he said, the girl hates this city and will hate me as one of its rooms. She wears sorrow like a dress and will not be made a bride by a joke. She is a child. She is a Stark, Tywin said, and you are a Lannister. Our house will not be persuaded to charity by our enemies, nor will it be robbed by our friends. Make it gentle. Make it quick. Cersei laughed when the word reached her, and then stopped and drank her own wine and found it tasted like the inside of a black cup. She will be wasted on you, she told Tyrion, and he did not bother to reply. He went to Sansa's solar and stood in the doorway and tried to hold himself like an ordinary man and failed on an old, deep level that had nothing to do with height and everything to do with years of being looked at as if he were a letter in a script no one had learned to read. Sansa listened to what he had to say and the color went out of her face carefully, as if she had learned to control it the way one can control breath. She looked down at her hands and then up at him and said, I will do what is asked. I will be kind if kindness can live here, Tyrion said before she could begin to fear him more than she already feared the world. I will not hurt you. I will not take what is not given. She nodded, and for a moment her face looked like the winter sea near White Harbor with the gray light on it. Cold, beautiful, more alive than people expect. I have letters from my father, she said later, when the long, terrible business was done and the crown had been made to laugh and the betting had been prevented by a very explicit mercy. From the wall. He says I must survive. He writes very plainly. He always has. Tyrion held her words as another man might hold a cup of scalding broth, careful not to spill and careful not to drop. He is a good man, he said simply, and Sansa made a small sound that might have been agreement and might have been grief remembering its manners. Olenna's mouth pinched and thinned and then smoothed. "You are not beaten yet," she told Marjorie as they watched the snow come and go along the rooftops. "A garden survives snow. You lay wood around the roots and wait. Then you be ready to cut the branch at the right hour." "I would prefer a vine," Marjorie said lightly. "It climbs where it wishes." "It climbs where it can," Olenna corrected her briskly, and sent a letter to Peter Baelish with a seal that looked harmless because it was pretty. Baelish wrote back from the Vale because he had accepted another letter, the one Tywin had sent, and made it into a stepping stone. Lisa Arryn had wept and cackled and married him in a dress. He could not quite keep his hands from smoothing, as if she were a piece on a board that did not sit properly. He wrote to Olenna in the sly, parched hand of a man who lives high and breathes thin air. He wrote, "Turn the boy's story into a tale with a better ending for everyone, and no one will ask about the beginning." He wrote, "I can find you a thread to pull if you provide the scissors." Tywin learned of the Vale marriage because Tywin learned of such things as he learned of the price of tallow and the place where a road was about to wash out. He set it aside because the north was quiet and the Riverlands were eating their own bread and the Reach had come to heal. He had other pieces that would not sit. There was the cold. There was the Night's Watch asking, politely at first and then in cheap ink because paper was scarce, for more of everything. He began to move a portion of the realm's grain north on ships that did not look as if they belonged to the crown. He wrote balances until the numbers pleased him. From the wall, Eddard Stark wrote one more letter and sealed it with black wax because that seemed proper. He wrote to Tywin and said the word duty 3 times. He wrote to Catelyn and said the word love twice and then crossed one of them out and said it again. He wrote to Robb and said, "You are a man and also my son." He wrote to Sansa and said, "You will bend. Bending can be done with grace." He wrote to Arya and said, "Do not be the first to speak when a fool is speaking." He wrote to Jon and did not write the thing he had wanted to write his whole life and wrote instead, "There is a truth that belongs to you. I have carried it. I will set it down when I can bear the price of doing so." He folded that with a hand that shook once and then did not. Arya learned to shoot in gloves and then with the gloves off. She learned to carry a pail across ice and not to slip because slipping makes a noise. She learned to watch the faces of men for the shape fear makes when it has eaten too much pride. Sam sat with her once and told her a story about a bird that sleeps on the wing. "You can sleep moving," he said wonderingly. "You can learn to rest while your feet keep going." Arya nodded and later tried to do it and stumbled and laughed at her own foolishness alone because there was no one else to laugh for her. Jon became the sort of man other men brought questions to without thinking about why. He stood between the men of the Watch and the wildlings that Stannis had broken and found himself speaking words that sounded like treaties. He found Ygritte among the prisoners and she looked at him with the old half-smile and said, "Your wall held, for now." He nodded because he refused to pretend the world was anything other than what it was. When she turned away, he felt something stop and then go on because that is how such things end. Stannis left men at Eastwatch and went back to Dragonstone by way of White Harbor because winter makes men count their stores twice and he wanted to be seen counting. He spoke to Wyman Manderly with his jaw set and his hands steady. He made promises that were not sweet. He offered law like bread. Manderly bowed and sent boats out with more grain than he had planned to and told stories in his hall that made the south sound farther away. Stannis did not smile and Davos did in the way his face did when he had done a hard thing and no one had made it harder than necessary. In the capital, the Tyrells got their wedding. It did not come as quickly as they had wanted. It came the way snow comes to a place where the sea feels bold, with flurries first and then with a thickness that dents roofs. Tywin measured the hour with his own private watch. When he judged it right, he announced it as if he had always meant to, and the city began to make garlands out of cloth dyed green because green dye can be had even when other things are scarce. Marjorie smiled and meant half of it and learned to mean the other half. Joffrey practiced speeches. Cersei did not sleep. Tyrion stood in the garden behind the Great September and watched the old women hang bows of rosemary and think how perniciously weddings smelled like kitchens. Sansa stood at his side, her hand inside his as if she had set it there and then forgotten. "They will be kinder when he dies," she said suddenly, the way a child says something when she thinks no one can hear her. Tyrion turned his head and looked at her profile and found nothing of a child there. "Who?" "Everyone," she said. She did not look to see what his face did. If he were gone, perhaps the world would learn to breathe. He could have told her things about power and the way a headless snake still coils. He could have told her the Tyrells would not make the world kinder for her. He said nothing. He had learned of late the uses of silence. He led her into the sept when the bells rang because that was what the hours demanded. The poison did not come that day. A hand brushed hair and a stone did not fall. A cup was lifted and did not tilt far enough. A woman who had stocked kitchens her whole life miscounted. Just once, and the chain of custody that death loves broke for an hour. The feast afterward tasted of missed moments and of roasted swan. Joffrey lived and unwrapped his gifts and smiled with his lips and not his eyes. He was a boy and a king and a danger. Olenna ate her orange peel. That night, Cersei sat with her father in the hand solar and spoke without irony. "He must be reigned," she said. "Marjorie will try to turn him into a song, and he will not be turned. He will pull something down on his own head and yours too." "Then teach him," Tywin said. He did not look up from the notes on the Blackwater's dredging. "Or keep the consequences small." "I am tired of small consequences," Cersei said, and he did look at her then, with a kind of weary surprise, as if he had forgotten his daughter could be tired. He opened his mouth and then closed it again. He said nothing of fathers and daughters and letters and the price of confessing in time. He set down his quill and lifted his wine and tasted it and found it to be what wine is, honey made stern. In the north, Robb Stark stood in the Godswood of Winterfell and learned how to speak aloud to a father who was not there. He held things together with the stubbornness of fate. Bannermen with old grievances, small clothes inventories, the way one keeps a near-ruined castle from admitting the snow through a gap under a door. Theon Greyjoy drank and smiled and thought of ships and did not yet betray anyone because sometimes betrayal needs a vacuum to rush into, and when a house is full, air sits still. Catelyn wrote and waited and kept a candle burning at night because it meant something and because it kept her hands busy. The South invented small wars to keep itself from having larger ones. Peter Baelish wrote Lisa a poem and then a promise and then a request. She sent him a key and then a weeping and then her body. He said thank you each time with equal courtesy. He made the veil into something a little more like himself and a little less like what it had been. He changed the way letters came in and went out. He trimmed Jon Royce's pride by the smallest possible amount and told himself he would one day cut more. Across the sea, a girl with 3 dragons learned to sit straighter in a saddle and to say no to men who had rehearsed the yes they expected. She took a city and then took another because one city seemed like luck and 2 like policy. She learned that freeing slaves turns them into people and people want different things. She learned to go to sleep when a lizard made of flame coiled by her bed unwillingly and to wake and find it there still. She learned to answer to mother and to know when to be a queen instead. At the wall, Eddard Stark went to Maester Aemon one evening and stood in the doorway for a moment before going in. "I have a story to tell," he said, and heard his voice shake once like a leaf with frost on it. "Will it be told to the right person?" Aemon asked mildly. So many stories fail at that last turn. "Not yet," Eddard said, and put his hands on the back of a chair until his knuckles went white and then not. "Soon." "Ah," Aemon said, and smiled in the way he did when he heard something that pleased him. "Soon is a sort of peace men give themselves. It has its uses." In the practice yard, Arya fought a tall boy with a scar on his lip, and then she fought the cold, and then she fought herself, which is the hardest fight. Jon stood with his hands behind his back and said nothing except when a correction would save a bruise. He thought of the girl beyond the wall who had laughed at him and thought of Sansa in the city and of the way his father's eyes had looked when he spoke of truths costed like iron. He thought of a battle that had been won and 2 that were coming and a winter whose edges were just now being felt by men who had thought winter a story. On the morning the first real storm arrived, men woke to a silence like thick cloth. The snow fell heavy, muffling footfalls and orders and the small curses men utter when their laces will not cooperate. Eddard stepped out onto the walkway and the first flakes hit his face and stayed. He looked out over the white into white with white on the horizon and thought, very clearly, it is all beginning. He did not mean the war. Wars begin over and over because men insist on their beginnings. He meant the season in which things are set to their tests. He went down and found Jon at the gate and Arya with a bucket and Sam with a book under his arm because Sam carried books like men carry swords, for courage. "We will hold," he said, because he always said it now and because it had become true by repetition as much as by action. He touched Jon's shoulder as he did, and then he did not take his hand away. He said, with the words cold in his mouth and sweet, "After this storm, come to me. I will tell you something that will make a piece of the world look different." Jon turned toward him with a care that made Eddard want to laugh and weep. He said, a whisper. After, Eddard said. He lifted his eyes and saw, far away and close by, the shape of a bird against the falling white. It might have been a raven. It might have been something else. He did not speculate. He took a breath and tasted iron and snow and a little of the wood smoke that meant home if a man had learned to call this place home. He smiled without showing his teeth. In the capital, Olenna Tyrell ate her candied orange peel and let her tongue rest. She had waded through one wedding dry of triumph. She did not intend to endure a second. She made new arrangements, very small. Nothing a grand old house would notice if it were busy keeping the realm's coins sorted. She pinched a stone between forefinger and thumb and put it under a curl of hair that she smoothed with a grandmother's gesture toward a girl she liked well enough. She sent a quiet word to Peter about a ship that should be ready to slip its moorings the night after a feast. He wrote back a drawing of a ladder with 3 rungs and a flourish. Tywin checked the dredging again and signed his name neatly and called for his cloak. He walked the walls of the Red Keep before sleep the way he always had when there was something that wanted doing he could not do with his hands. He looked out over the city, at the patches of snow that had survived the day on rooftops and the smears in the alleys where people had tracked the white into dirt. He thought, as he always did, of his father and of debts and of not being laughed at. He thought of a letter a son had sent him and of what it had made him do and of how many lives had been altered because a man had chosen to tell the truth once. He did not believe in gods with faces. He believed in the machinery people make of themselves and the pressure that makes it run. He slept and woke and wrote another letter and then another. In one of them, he wrote a sentence in which he used the word mercy and then struck it through and replaced it with order. He placed the stones on his desk as he had before. Black, white, red. He moved the black a finger's breadth and then the red and then the white. He did not tell himself a story about omens. He told himself a story about work and the day's work following the day's work. The stones clicked on wood with small sounds that were almost pretty. Far away, in a city that still smelled of salt and heat even in winter, a girl sat on a throne that had been someone else's and listened to supplicants tell her of water and of theft and of men too quick to take. Her dragon stretched one wing, and she reached and set her palm lightly to its warm, scaled shoulder and felt a tremor that felt like a world adjusting itself in its sleep. She did not yet know what she would be to the place she had left behind. Places have their own ideas about people. At the wall, the storm deepened. Men pulled hoods low and went where they were told and stayed where they were not, and the snow climbed the walls of the buildings until windows had small frames of white. The great ice did not notice. It held because it had been made to hold by hands that had not imagined some of the things that would push against it and had imagined some too well. Eddard stood in the common hall for a time and watched a fire. He had never put much stock in looking for lessons there. Tonight he watched and saw only the way wood turns to light and the way that light turns to ash and the way warmth leaves a place reluctantly when there is a good reason to stay. He went to his cell and took out the letter he had written for Jon and then put away and then taken out again and then put away. He read it in the light his candle made and thought it was not good and thought it was not good enough and then thought it was perhaps the only kind of good that matters. Honest, clean, without ornament. He read the line that said, "You are not what the world called you because I needed it to. You are your own name." He breathed. He set the wax to melting and held his ring in it, not with a lion and not with a direwolf because he had left those in another life, but with a small plain stamp they used for accounting. He felt the heat and did not flinch. He pressed and lifted and saw the seal cool to dull. The world held its breath. He blew his candle out and let the dark come the way it comes in winter, very fast. He did not know the hour that a woman in a city far away pinched a stone out of a net and placed it on a palm under a table, and then let it fall into a cup full of wine made thin to please a boy's vanity. He did not yet know that a ship had been made ready for a girl with a face like winter to run to, or that a man with clever fingers had rehearsed a smile for that girl that would last her a year and change her into something else. He did not know because men do not know at once all the things their letters begin. He knew the snow and the cold and the weight of a promise that had warmed under his hand like a living thing. He lay down and slept as a soldier sleeps, flat, total, at the center of a storm, and dreamed of a door opening and a name spoken and the sound a father makes when he says the truth at last.